Okay. Here we are.
More than we were 2 minutes ago.
There you go. Okay. So let's see where we are. We are on Yud Bet Amud Bet. Okay. The last 3 lines. And I'll just back ourselves into the Mishnah so we remember what the Mishnah is talking about. The Mishnah is on Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, bottom of 11A. And is that the right Mishnah? Right, correct. And the Mishnah had a number of sundry topics that mentioned. One was that people shouldn't go out with things in there that they may forget before Shabbos, such as the tailor may have a needle in his stuck in his clothing, or you have a writer, a scribe, who has a pen in his pocket, or other types of things. That was one thing. And the next part of the Mishnah talked about not to read by the light of a single candle, because you may come to adjust it. And then the Mishnah says, if you look at the Mishnah, this is Yud Aleph Yud Aleph. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the bottom. Be'emet Amru. Everybody sees the 4th line from the bottom. Be'emet. Right? Be'emet means really and truthfully. And Be'emet actually Be'emet means an old tradition. In other words, sometimes it means it's Halach Moshe Sinai. In this case, it means that really this is what they had this tradition for a long time. Be'emet Amru Chazan. The Chazan is not what we call a Chazan. The Chazan is more like the Shamus or the Malamed, who's teaching the young children. Hasham Achazan Roeh Hechan Tinokos Korin Avahu Lo Korei. That the Chazan or the Malamed can see where the children are reading. You know, they're reading Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daleth, Breshit, Bar, Lakim, Eita, Shamayim, right? These baby words. He can see what they're reading in the Chumash and the Siddur, but he can't read with them because they're reading by candlelight. What's the concern about candlelight? It may come to adjust it. It may come to flicker. So you will reach over and to adjust it, which may put it out, which may make it maybe lighting, havara, fire, may make greater fire. What about the children? So the shamus can see where they're reading, but he can't read himself. So how can the children read?
Better eyes.
Okay, well, maybe that's a good answer. Yeah. So the answer is the children are not going to reach over to the candle. You're going to say because of safety. No, because they see the Malamed is watching them. They're going to just keep reading. This is a very strict, differentiated classroom with kids of all different ages who are learning to read. They're going to keep their eyes reading. If they can't read, it's the shamus' job to adjust the light. So they're afraid to do anything except just continue reading. So therefore, and you'll see that one answer in the Gemara. The Gemara will give another answer. But the shamus himself may not read. So how will he know where they're up to?
Knows it off by heart.
He knows it by heart, or he knows the beginning of each paragraph. You can scan it, take a visual. Like if they're reading, remember what they didn't have primers like we have today, like reading books. They were probably reading from Chumashim or Siddurim or other texts as well. So you can see if the kid is reading Adon Olam, you can see the kid is reading where he's reading. You know Adon Olam by heart. You know Breishis by heart, or the Shabbos at least know Breishis by heart. And so that's one, and that's a short piece more we're going to do, explaining that. Aval hu lo yikra, he can't read with them. Kiyotzibo, another rule that we have, which is about trying to build prohibitions that people don't come to slip, is completely unrelated to Masechet Shabbos. We're going to spend some time on it today, so it's important we just read these last 6 words. Kiyotzibo, or 8 words, lo yachal hazav im hazabav neher galaveira. That a zav, who is a person who has an emission, and a zaba, who is a woman who has an emission, each of them are tameh, and they're probably not in a position that they're going to become intimate with each other because of their respective defects or illnesses that are very difficult to become intimate with, because that's exactly where the flow is coming from. So nonetheless, they should not eat together, mibnei her galavera, because we're afraid that they will come to slip and become intimate even in that stage. And surely, for people who are tahar, a person who's tahar should not eat with a zaba and so forth. So in other words, because they will come to eat together, they may come to slip. And the same thing, because you'll read by the light of a candle, you may come to adjust the light itself. It's a basic rule that applies to many cases. The case here of the Zav and the Zava is an extreme case because it's probably not in reality that these two individuals who are suffering from whatever the equivalent would be, gonorrhea or other venereal diseases or some other form of which was viewed as a tumor, would be involved in some type of intimacy to begin with. But that's how far that you see that Chazal went to build Gzeirot, to build prohibitions that people wouldn't come to do X because they may come to do Y, which is much more severe. Okay, let's go to our Gemara now. So it's the last two lines of Yud Bet Amud Bet. B'yemet Amra Chazan. The Chazan can't read by the candlelight, but it says, so the Gemara says via Amrit Reisha Roeh. So the first it says the Chazan sees where the Tinokot are reading, but he doesn't read. So how can he see what it means? So the Gemara says my love likros. Right? Roa, my love likros. Isn't he going to read and see it? So lo l'sader Rashi Parshiotav. Okay, in other words, he's organizing and seeing where they are at the beginning of the paragraph. The kids are reading the beginning of Parsha's, Vayikra, so he can see where the beginning of the Parsha is. He doesn't have to read it. If he's going to read word by word, then he may come to adjust the light. But if he's just seeing, he knows the layout of the page, he wants to make sure they're on the right page, that's okay. So that's what we had said before, and that's the Gemara simply underscores. My love, likros lo l'sadar Rashi Parshiyotov. V'chein amar Rabba bar Shmuel, avol masada hu Rashi Parshiyotov, v'kula Rashi Parshiyotov. He can organize and make sure that they're reading from the beginning of the right paragraph. They're all reading correctly. Okay, the Gemara's one question is about the kids, what I told you before, V'kula Parsha Lo, but he can't read the entire Parsha, he can only look at the Rashi Parshiyotov, the beginning of where the reading is. So the Gemara says, Meitvei, we have a Brisa on the Tosefta, which says something a little different that the Gemara thinks. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer Tinokot Shebeit Rabban Hayu Mesadrin Parshiyotov V'korim L'Elor Haner. The children, they would organize for them the beginning of the Parsha, and they would read by the candlelight. Now, how can it be that the children are going to read? Aren't we afraid that they will adjust the candlelight, right? So the Gemara answers, and this is what I told you before, Ibai Dema, one answer, Rashi Parshiyotov. No, it means even the kids themselves are only reading the beginning of the Parsha, they're not looking at every single word, right? They're just getting a feel for the page. Ibai Dema, Shani Tinoko, the young children are different, Hol Ve'emad Rabban Alem, Loati Litzloyev. Because the fear of their teacher is upon them, they're not going to reach over and to adjust and to lean over and adjust the candle itself. They're just going to read, because the moment they get out of their seat, right? You had the old-time malamas like I did. What happened when you got out of your seat? Yep, that's exactly what happened. Okay, correct.
You grew up in the Bronx. That's why.
I grew up with European teachers. I grew up with European rabbis. Okay, so some were very flippant about how they slapped, and one was very particular. If you got slapped, it really meant something. Okay, because you only slapped when it was really serious. Okay. Okay, anyways, back at the ranch. We don't do that anymore in education. We don't do that anymore at home. Okay? So we're going to take that off the tape. Now, at any rate, the last part of the mission is about the Zav and the Zaba. That's where we're going to spend time today. Okay, Kiyotzi ber lo yochal Zav Mazaba. Tanya. Here was a brisa that expands upon how far Chazal were concerned about sexuality, that they built certain rules about to ensure that people would not come to slip and sin. Tanya, Rav Shimon Elazar Omer, Bo Rei Ad Hechan Pirza Tara B'Yisrael. Okay, look how careful that the Tahara has expanded, and that Chazal were concerned about it. Shlosh Shanina. We didn't say La Yochal Atara Matmeya. We didn't say that a tar should not eat with a tmeya together, which would be logical that they may come to slip. Ela lo yochal azav im azaba mipnei hergel aveira. Okay, that a zab should not eat with zaba. That is because we're so concerned about building differences between, or building prohibition. I won't say prohibitions. Building protections. Building gzeirot or takanot to make sure that people don't slip. That with the takana here was not even about healthy people, right? With Torah and a Tomei, but rather even about a zav and a zaba. Okay, so in other words,
but it's only that particular combination that
no, it means anyone else. It means two people who are not married should not be eating together. Now, just a
second. It says zav and zava. We don't have zav and zava today.
Correct. We do have nida. I'll tell you what the Achronim talk about the fact that this seems to be something that they were careful about. They didn't eat on the same table. There's no one here today that's not careful about not eating on the same table with an isha who's a nida. Right? What's the answer? So they explain that the tables in the days of the Gemara were very small. Right? How how can I describe this? They were like our card tables, not card tables, our TV tables. So in fact, when the Gemara Maseches Pesachim talks about taking away the Seder plate and bringing the Seder plate, they take away the shulchan. You have to think of Roman couches, Roman chaise lounges, where they're eating over, and they would bring them these little tables, and they would eat off the tables. Two people eating on a table like that, tete-a-tete, is really can be very intimate. So when husband or wife, when she was in Nida, there were certain rules that were placed about ensuring that they would not come to kind of be flippant with each other, because they're married, and after all, everything is okay. So therefore, the tables we have do not fall in that category. But eating, so to speak, that close together, intimately, in this little card table may have been the issue that it was being referred to, because that's how the tables were. So, but the answer is, you're building certain gedarim between people. The point here is that they were building the gedarim not just between healthy people. They're building the gedarim even between people who were very ill, who were tamei, but also physically would not be the kind of people who are suffering from these illnesses who would be engaging in sexual intimacy by virtue of their illness.
So in other words, what you're saying is it's kal v'chomer.
Kal v'chomer, right.
Therefore, a zav or someone who's tamei with someone who's tahor.
Right.
You learn that out of this particular case.
Correct. In other words, kol shekain, surely someone else. In other words, that's the point. The point of Rav Shimon Elazar here is saying, look how far that they were willing to build gzeros to ensure that the Jewish people would remain tahar. This is like, this. Sometimes we say to ourselves, what were Chazal thinking that they built these certain rules? This looks like one of them. Would we even expect that a Zav and a Zava would be intimate with each other? And the answer is, well, you want to know something? The drive is a very impulsive drive. Great politicians have been brought down. Great people are brought down by this. And as a result, because of this, even a Zav and a Zava, the Gezer was built in for this. So that's what it means here. That look how far that the idea of making tahara, ensuring that people remain pure and did not engage in sexual intimacy with people that were inappropriate, that because of arayos, so they didn't do it for this, right? They surely didn't do it there. But even a zav and a zava, they would actually set up the gzera for because of hergel avera. Okay, so that's, in other words, all the Zav and Zava is, and we're going to get into a whole long discussion about Nida and Zava and sexuality in the next couple lines, but all this is saying here is that sometimes Chazal built takanas that we don't understand why, but they felt were important. The same way, go back to the candlelight. We pointed out today with our electric lights, it's not an issue. But the candlelight, the single light candle that you were going to reach from on Shabbos, so what could happen? You may reach it over, and you'll say, well, I'm smart enough. And that was the case that we had with Rav Shishmael ben Elisha last week. He said, I'm going to be smarter, I'm going to read by the candlelight, and I won't reach over. And when there were two versions, one version he almost reached over, he caught himself, and the second one, he did reach over, and he did adjust it, and he wrote down in his pinkas, in his booklet, he's going to bring a korban chatas when we'll rebuild the base of Mikdash. So sometimes these things look like they're far-fetched, but they're built in a way to protect. Like, for example, the idea of muktzah. Muktzah is the perfect concept that we say we can't pick up objects because we may come to use those objects and they don't have a Shabbos purpose, right? Example I often give is about a buzzsaw, right? Chainsaw. So chainsaw is muktzah. Why? Because the chainsaw's only purpose is really to cut trees down. And if it's a gas chainsaw, it's really aish. But what happens if I want to use my chainsaw and put it up as a doorstep? I need to keep the door open, the door's banging back and forth. I don't know, it's my backyard, it's a garage, whatever it is. So I can't pick it up and put it against the door. And that's a pretty heavy thing that would hold the door open or close. And why? Because it's muktzah. Why is it muktzah? Because the whole purpose is using a non-Shabbos activity. Now you say, what's the chance, Yeres, that you're going to go pull on the buzzsaw? No, I would never do that because I don't even know how to use the machine. But something more comparable. And the answer is not. But it could come that I forget myself at one point, and I don't know, maybe I would. So these are the kinds of rules that Chazal built together in order to build protections. Like saying when you have the signs, high tension wires to keep people away, or you build a barbed wire fence around it. Right? Or if you ever see in Eretz Yisrael, they have different kinds of poles. Especially in the cities, the poles are not single poles. The poles, in many cases, because there was no lumber and they had no concrete, are like a lattice work. Have you ever seen them in the streets? In fact, there's no place to walk on the sidewalk. So you really can monkey climb up these kinds of things. And they have like poles sticking out at about a height of about 10, 15 feet. Right? Danger and everything else, not to climb through it because you really can't get around them. That's really a gzeira. You You say, who's going to climb up there? They're walking on the street. It's 15 feet up in the air. And the answer is yes, some are sugar wood, therefore we build the gzeira. Okay, so today's discussion is really about this gzeira and about how people can be slip if they're not careful, and especially here when it talks about sexual intimacy, there's a couple of connections as well, and we'll see it's going to go actually into Tumah and Tahara and Trumas Amaisus. Okay, so that's the opening statement. Elalo yochal azav mazabam neher galavera. Now we're really getting a little further afield. We're going to talk about zav, two types of zav. This is not about sexual contact. This is really about being sure that a person stays tahar. Do you remember we once learned about prushim who were very careful about remaining tahar? Right? Back in the day we did Masechet Chagiga. Okay? So everything they did, they wanted to stay tahar. There's nothing wrong with becoming tameh, but it's wrong to become tameh and go to Beis Mikdash. There were Amei Haaretz who were not that careful. They kept everything super kosher, but they weren't careful about Tumah and Tahara when they weren't in the Beis Mikdash. Sometimes we weren't sure if they took Trumos and Maisros, or at least took Maisros, but that's a separate issue. So here's the case. So a Zav, a person who is a Parush, one of the Prushim, who's eating with one of the Amei Haaretz, what could be the probability that may come up here? The Amei Haaretz may give the Prushi food that is not tithe, or food that is tameh, right? And the prushi may not realize it. So how far can that even go? So the Gemara says, Kayotzebo, another far-fetched example, in the same way that Zav and Zava is a far-fetched example of sexual contact or intimacy, because they're both ill, right? Much more far-fetched than healthy people. So too, the following example is also far-fetched, but Chazal were concerned about it, which is Lo yochal zav parush im zav amar. This is about two people. It's not about sexuality of male and female. It's about two people eating together. A zav, who is a prushi, cannot eat with a zav who's an amaretz. Shema yargilenu esla. We're afraid that he may come close to him, or usual with him, or hamish with him. And he may give him something he can't eat. So the Gemara says, what could he give him not eat? What could be so bad? This one's a zav, that one's a zav. What's he going to give him? Ella Ema. What's so bad that a prushi would be in contact with namaritz? They were human beings. They were just different parts of society. They had different rules about tumatara, but they were mentioned. They were yidden like anyone else. So the Gemara says, Ella Ema shema yochilena devarim tmeim. We're afraid if the two of them meet together, the Zav, who is the Yamaretz, will give something that is Tameh to the Prushi, who is Tahar. Okay, you understand that? If you say yes, then the answer is you don't understand it. Okay? Let's back it up a step. We're saying that two people can't forget sexuality. They can't eat together. One is a prushi, one of the prushim, and one is one of the ameyaretz. Both are zavim. So we say they shouldn't eat together on the same little table, not across the table here, the same little TV table. Because what's going to happen? They're going to come to share food, and the zav, who is the ameyaretz, he doesn't care about eating tumah, and the zav, who is the prushi, right, the parush, he does care about eating tumah. So if they're eating together, one on top of the other, on this little TV table, what's going to happen? The zav, who's the amoritz, is going to give the prushi something that's tameh. And therefore the two of them shouldn't eat together. Do we get a response that makes a little sense?
Yeah.
Okay?
Is it tameh because he touched it?
The food was tameh. The food came into contact with something that was tameh. In other words, food... He's tameh. But
So he serves her.
no, forget the hers. The two people, the two males.
A serves B, but A...
They're both sitting on the same table. They're both sitting in a table this size. He's got his food. He's got his food, right?
They're dipping into the same.
They're dipping in the same thing. They're sharing. They're sharing. They could be sharing the same lafo.
Yeah.
But or more importantly, they each have their own sandwich, but they're eating together. So it's going to come very simply. You know what? I see you didn't finish your cookies. Can I have your cookies? Right? I see you got a tomato there. I don't like tomatoes there. Why don't you have my tomato? Why don't you have my apple? So it's very easy that one would give the other. Now, what could be the problem? If the person who's not concerned about tumah is tameh, and he's eating foods that's tameh, he's going to give it to the prushi, who is concerned about it. That's the case. The fallacy here, and this is the part that why you're all probably not understanding it, is both these guys are zavs.
Right.
by definition, they're automatically going to become tamei, because zav is a form of tuma.
He already is tamei.
So they're both tamei. So in other words, and that's what the Gemara is going to say. So what's the real concern? We're concerned they shouldn't eat together. This one's a zav, he's a prushi. This one's a zav, he's an amaretz.
They're already tamei.
They're already tamei.
What's the point?
What's the point? I mean, tuma. So this guy's eating food that was tamei. This guy's eating food that was tamei. The moment he eats it, he's a zav. He makes his own food tamei. So who cares? I mean, they're equals. Maybe in a different lifetime, in a different day, when one goes to the mikveh and the other goes to the mikveh, they will have different statuses about tuma and tahara. But, so that's the Gemara is trying to understand what could be the problem. We're trying to understand it's a far-fetched issue. The far-fetched issue is whether they will share food, but even if they do share food, right, even if the worst case scenario is going to happen, who cares? So first the Gemara said, Shema Yargilenu Eslo, who'll become very, very common with him. The Gemara didn't understand that to begin with, because Yargilenu Eslo is something that deals with sexual intimacy. Very hergel. You get two men and women get very common with each other. Who knows what happens?
But this is two men.
But this is about two men, and so therefore it's not about Yargilenu. It's Ela Ema Shema Yachilem Dvarm Tmeim. He'll feed them. The zav who's the amaretz will feed the zav who's the parush, who's one of the prushim, food that's tamei. So the Gemara says, Atu zav parush lav dvarm tmeim achel. Isn't the zav who's the parush? He's already eating the davar tamei because he is tamei. So who cares? What's this real concern? What's the gzeira they can't eat together? What could go off the rails? So Rabbi says the gzeira is not now. The gzeira could be next week. Gzeira shema yachilenu dvarim she'enim metukanim. No, I'm sorry. It's about he may give him things that aren't metukanim, aren't you didn't take ma'isa from. Okay, so in other words, we're afraid that they're both tamei. Okay, so the issue is not tuma, but the issue is the people who are me'aretz, where we always were concerned if they gave all the trumas and maisros. They gave truma, but they didn't always give all the maisros to the Leviim.
So all the food will become tamei. So what?
So the food, so he will eat food that's tamei that was not removed maisra from. Until you have food, until you take off trumas and maisros, you cannot eat the food.
Isn't it worse eating food that's tamei?
No, tuma is just, we're all tamei today. I'm tamei, you're tamei, we all eat food that's tamei. But food that you have not separated and given to the Kohen and then to the Levi is called tevel, and you cannot eat tevel. The only time you can eat tevel is before it is completed. No, we had a discussion about eating from the wine press.
Right.
Well, once the food process is completed and you're eating and it's done, you cannot eat the food until you've given and set aside for the Kohen, set aside for Levi. You don't have to give it to the Kohen Levi, you can set it aside. Here's 2%, here's 10% for you. You have to, there's 10% for Ma'aser Sheni, take to Shlayim. Until I do that, it's called tevel. One of the issues today is about food that comes from Eretz Yisrael is whether they gave Trumas and Ma'asos.
Right.
Okay, so and it's pro forma and how it's done. We don't, with the Kohanim can't come and say give it to me because we don't know really who's a Kohen and who's a Levi, but we still have to go through the process. So if you buy, for example, from they sell on the open market, they sell Israeli produce. Sometimes there are issues that they haven't given Trumas and Ma'asos.
We don't know that they've given.
We don't know that they've given, right? But
they may have given, we just don't know if they.
Correct. They may have given, right? Sometimes the company assumes that, since that there's a certain amount of spoilage, this is the very shaky heta that they really work with, which people don't really like to rely on. They'll assume that if I'm shipping out, 100 kilo of oranges, right? By the time it leaves the orchard and reaches the supermarket, 10% has gone spoiled. That 10% is spoiled. That's going to be Trumas and Ma'asos. Okay, but it's not really true because you haven't designated it. It's only like de facto. It was separate. It wasn't really separated. So there are shippers and suppliers that the Rabbanut goes in and says we will take off a certain amount that we will set aside as Trumas and Ma'asos.
And it's stamped.
Correct, and it's stamped. Correct, but you don't often see it here when fresh produce comes to Sobeys or the other stores. That's the concern, right? Then you have to take it off yourself.
Or
you have to take it off yourself.
They used to have a couple of guys doing it at Sobeys.
Maybe
Rabbi Berman used to do it, as a matter of fact.
I hope they do. Okay, I hope they do. I'm saying I think Sobeys may be less of an issue. This Sobeys where they have mashgichim running around, but it could be lots of times you walk around. They tell you where the produce is from: produce of Florida, produce of South America, produce of here, produce of Peru. Right, stuff comes from Israel. That's what I'm trying to say. So in other words, the issue is not tuma. They're all tummy. The issue is a separate issue. And that was an issue that we were concerned that the Amei Haaretz did not always give Meiser. By the way, the term that we use for the food from an Am Haaretz, the special term that's used, you'll recognize this name in one of the Masechtas, is called Demai. Food that we know did not give Trumas Meiser is called Tevel. Okay. Food that we were not quite sure if all the Meisos were given by the Am Haaretz is called Demai. It's a question. Okay, I don't know what the word means, probably an Aramaic term. So Abaye says, what was the issue of the two of them eating together, and they may share? Not that the food become tummy. The guys, both of them are tummy. They're both zavim. They're both super tummy. Zav is a very severe tumah. But what's the concern? The concern is if tummy, but still you can't eat food that you didn't take trumas and meisos from. And we didn't know if the Am Haaretz gave trumas. That's called mitukanim. Mitukan means it's set, it's finished, it's done, it's fixed. If you don't take off trumas and meisos, it's not mitukan, it's tevel. So that's one answer. Rav Amar, Rav says not really true. Rov Amei Haaretz Masrin Haim. No, most of the Amei Haaretz, most of the time actually did give Meisos. So even though you may have a particular Amei Haaretz who did not, if we don't know, we assume that it was done. In other words, even though it's the Mai, but with this a whole machlokas, what exactly was going on? What we don't, you don't know what goes on, but we know it wasn't 100%. Right? Do you assume that, let's say, 75% of the Amei Haaretz were giving Trumas and Meisos, therefore you can assume that the food he's going to give to the Chaver, the Parish, is going to be okay, or not? Rava says, Rov Amei Haaretz Masim Haim. So it's fine. So that's the issue, is not Meiser anymore. Ella, what's the concern? What's the concern why these two guys can't eat off this little TV table? El Shema Yehi Ragel Etzlo, V'Achilenu Dvorim Tmeim B'Mei Tu Taraso. The concern is that maybe they'll eat together, and he will give him, the Am Haaretz will give Dvorim Tmeim, not to the Zav when he's Tamei today, but the two will get so comfortable eating together today when they're Zavim, when they'll come back next week, after a week is over, and they're no longer Zav, and they're cured, and they brought the Karbanos and gone to the Beis HaMikdash, then one is Tahar, the Parish, the Chaver is Tahar, the Am Haaretz is Tamei, and the Am Haaretz will give the Parish that which is Tamei then. So the issue is not even today. It's not like we're afraid he's going to give him the wrong stuff today. Today he can't give him the wrong stuff. But next week, next month, they may have the same situation. So therefore, if they get too chummy today, sharing food, and they get used to sharing food, it'll come up again later on. So in the end of this Gemara, the concern about the Zav and the two Zav in here is not really about becoming intimate. That's surely not the issue. That was the issue about Zav and a Zava. The issue here is about whether they would give him food that doesn't have maestros, that was not taken maestros from, or whether they get so chummy that even when he becomes tahar, both become tahar, he would give him food that was tamei. Okay. Yes.
The whole issue is not just tamei to do with whether the food's been tithed or not.
So there are two issues. According to Abaye, the issue is whether food was tithed. According to Rava says that even though we don't know for sure about the food, but most Amei Haaretz do, in absence of our knowledge, we assume therefore that there's like a chazaka, that it was given, and therefore the issue of tithing is not an issue. We assume that he is one of the majority of the Amei Haaretz who tithe. So what would be the issue? The issue is Tuman Tahar, not today when they're both Tamei, but if they start sharing food today, right? They'll share food next week and the week after.
If the tithing was done, you could almost not eat with anybody.
Oh, well, why do you say that?
It's
not really true. It's not true.
Because everybody's some anyway.
Right, correct. Right. It's like saying, you assume that if no person's keeping kosher, you rely upon its kashrus.
Yeah.
Right? Unless I see something that suddenly jumps out at me that I think something is wrong, or you hear things that are wrong, right? I don't have to go into the kitchen and check everything. We assume that's what it is, and I assume that that's the same application. So Tuman Tahara is a little different than tithing. Tithing is more serious because that's really Minatorah. Tuman Tahara is nothing wrong with becoming tamei. The issue is if you do become tamei and you go to Beis HaMikdash, that's a boo boo, right? By the speaking about going to the Beis HaMikdash, I think in the last month they said 1,500 people have gone up to Har HaBayit. In the last month. It's fascinating. It's the numbers of Jews. Okay, the numbers of Jews who are going to Har HaBayit, and we assume or hope they've gone to the mikveh before, and they're staying in the periphery of that has never been this high. So,
but it's going to mikveh enough.
Yes, to if you certain places, you can go into the Dome of the Rock, but there's certain peripheral areas that were considered to be actually outside where the Beis HaMikdash was, which was Har HaBayit. You can. And you can call up the Temple Mount, call up the what's it called, Rabbi Richmond from the Temple Institute, and they can arrange someone to take you up there. It's actually, it's not going about making a statement. It's about, but you have to go to mikvah. You have to go to mikvah before. Okay. All right. Anyways, having said that, the Gemara is going to digress into an issue about nida and about a husband and a wife. There are rules that Chazal built in about ensuring that a husband and wife, while the wife is a nida, do not engage in sexual relations, because that's prohibited by Torah. So they built certain things that were added to ensure that that would not come to be. Okay, so one of them is, and the Gemara calls it as it is. The Gemara says that when the wife is in the nida, they cannot sleep together completely naked, right? Even if they don't engage in sexual relations, but there's it's called hi bevigdo v'hu bevigdo. Okay. It sounds a little risque, but the Gemara says it as it is. Now, the Gemara is going to talk about that, and talk about this once again. We've gotten into a topic here about gezeros that ensure that we don't come to sin. So this would be a gezerah, right? That would be understood to prevent that. Something, by the way, that the Gemara is going to talk about that you can really relate to, okay? And this is not about sexuality, is about eating meat and milk. We don't eat meat and milk together, correct? But you have separate tablecloths for meat and milk, right? You have milchik tablecloths and fleshik tablecloths. Now what happens if you want to eat two people on the same table and one person's eating milchik and one person's eating fleshiks?
Separate tablecloth.
So you have a separate tablecloth, and why are we doing that? Well, by the way, this idea of having different tablecloths is you really could have the same tablecloth. The tablecloth is washed in between, right? But obviously it would be very confusing, right? Because the whole idea of having a tablecloth is ensuring that you don't come to confuse one with the other. But let's say you had, for example, not a tablecloth, you had separate placemats. That's usually the example. So you can have two people eating at the table, right, who are eating on separate placemats. I have a milchik placemat, you have a fleshik placemat. It's possible in your home you may have placemats when you eat because you don't want to put out the whole tablecloth. Right, so you have a fleshik placemat. So then we can eat on the same table, right, because we've built a heker. And obviously in this kind of table is one thing, but even on a smaller table, it would work because you're obviously setting up a type of differentiation. Okay, so you don't have to say, and that's what the Gemara is going to talk about. So the Gemara is going to talk about changes that kind of break the order because we're not eating together on the same tablecloth. The Gemara is going to talk about the fact that we all have, when we have two people together, sometimes if we build a separation and we build a change, one of us will definitely remember what the change is all about. So even if I'm eating fleshiks and you're eating milchiks and I forget that I'm eating fleshiks and I begin to grab your milchiks, you'll stop me, or vice versa. Because we have two things. We have one, independent thinking, and we also have a change in what the normal routine is that people eat together on the same tablecloth or the same table. Okay, so where are we up to? Ibailahu. So the Gemara is going to introduce this as a way to kind of talk about the idea of heker and changes, and do changes actually impact upon thing, and do they change the gzeros? Ibailahu. Nida maush tishan imbala. He bevigdo v'hu bevigdo. Can a nida sleep? It's actually raising as a question. Can a nida sleep with her husband? They're both completely clothed. Okay. In other words, what do you have here? You have two individuals who each have independent thoughts. So if one of them begins to slip, the other one will actually stop them. Okay. Once again, sexuality is very encompassing, but there are two people with independent minds. So, and by the way, this is about people who are married. Rav Yosef, Toshma, ha'of ola im gvina ala shulchan, ve'eno nechol divrei Beis Shammai. You can have oaf is what is fowl, right? Chicken. You can put on the same table as gvina, as cheese, and can't eat them together, divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says you can do that. Why would Beis Shammai say you can do that? It sounds like meat and milk on the same table. Because what are we talking about? What kind of meat? Chicken. And chicken is only rabbinically considered meat. Okay, so in other words, no one would say you can put meat. In other words, you surely can't eat meat and cheese together. This is not about eating them together, it's about putting them on the same tablecloth, same table.
In other words, it would be a gzera on a gzera.
Correct. So in other words, but that's how far we would. So Beit Shammai says for chicken, it's not such a big deal. The chicken itself is really not meat min Torah. You're not eating them together, so you're not doing an Avera min Torah. So in other words, I can put them on the same table as long as I don't eat them together. Olal shochan ve'eno nechol divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says the opposite. We follow Beis Hillel. Lo olev lo nechol. Okay, you can't eat it. It can't go on the table, and you obviously can't eat it together on the same together. So you see, so the Gemara wants to prove from this that according to Beis Hillel, then even if you have what are we trying to prove? That there is that there is what would it be? So you see that you cannot put, okay, here's what you have. So they're trying to make the comparison between the husband and the wife, and she's a nida, in the same bed, and they're clothed in the same way that I have chicken and I can't put chicken and meat, chicken and cheese on the same table separately. Okay?
Pretty far-fetched comparison.
So, but true, okay? And why is it far-fetched comparison? Because chicken and the cheese are inanimate. The husband and wife are animate. Right?
No, because one's the Rabbanan, one's the Daraita.
Right, okay.
So how can you compare the two?
Okay, but I'm saying the fact that they're wearing clothing, we'll assume they keep their clothing on. The concern is they may engage in certain other intimacies that are not sexual contact, right? But they're still clothed. So those are drabanan. So it is actually drabanan. And they're on the same bed, so they may roll together, they may hug each other, they may embrace each other. So no one is suggesting that they're actually involved in the sexual coitus. They're involved, but they could be actually embracing each other, but they're wearing clothing. So the Gemara wants to prove from this, at any rate, that you see, according to Beis Hillel, you can't do this. So therefore, they can't sleep on the same bed together. So the Gemara says, wait. Hasam lekadeas. Over there, with the chicken and the kvina, there's no real separate thinking. In other words, there's one person who's going to eat the table. He's going to come to the table, he has chicken, and he has cheese. It's only one mind. If he slips, there's nobody there to catch him. The example I gave you before was about two people. This is one person comes, can you put chicken on the table and cheese?
For one person?
For one person, and they'll remember that this is for lunch, and this is for supper. Or this is for now, and this will be for my, I'll come back in an hour from now and eat the chicken. Or 6 hours, or however you want to set up a scenario. So in other words, so the Gemara wants to first separate and say, well, here it's a little different because there's only one person in the mix. Over there, now one can argue, of course, the reverse. We have two people together, it takes two to tango. But the Gemara is assuming that two people together, one can catch the other one. So the Gemara says, wait, okay, but and the Gemara says, Hachanami Mistabra, the Hechadika Deos Shani, that it's different when you have two people on the table. When you have two people together, each catches the other. Katani Sefer, because the end of this Mishnah in Masechet Chulin, or Radios, says, Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Shnei Achsanoim, Ochlim al Shulchan Echad. Two guests, and Achsanoi is a guest. Two guests eating in an inn can eat on one table. This one eats his meat meal, and this one eats his dairy meal. And we're not concerned. Why? Because I'm eating my meal, which I have my salami sandwich. You are eating your meal. You have a cheese sandwich, and we're not going to share it. Because if I do want to take your cheese sandwich, you'll stop me. If you want to take my salami sandwich, I'll stop you. So you see that two deos is a reason that I can be less careful. One person can't have chicken and cheese on the table. Two people, it looks like, can. So in other words, if you want to make the comparison to the two people in the bed, it looks like two people could be in the bed. So Gemara says, wait, that's not really true. It's only about achsanoi who don't know each other. V'lavit marala. Didn't we say on this, says the Gemara, Amrav Chanan bar Ami, Amrav Shmuel, Lo shanu elam en shein makirin zed zed. That only applies where the two guests, the two travelers don't know each other. They're in an inn. So they're not going to share food to begin with. Each is going to eat their own food. They don't know each other. Aval makirin zed zed asurim. But if they reckon they're coming from the same party, right? They're having a tailgate party. They're both eating at this inn before they go. And this one ordered from the fleshik side of the menu, this one ordered from the milchik side of the menu. So then they can't eat together, because that's actually a point. If you have two deot and makirim, zvahachinami makirin zed zenninhu. Okay, so, and the same thing with the husband and wife, they obviously know each other. So the two to tango is going to apply at the table, and the two are going to apply in the bed. So Gemara says, Hachiyasha, 1 minute, let's take a step back. Hasam deos ika, shinu leka. Okay, hacha ika deos, vika shinoi. So the Gemara says as follows. I'll explain it to you, and you'll see how the Gemara really says things as they are. When it comes to eating on the table, and I have two people, and each know each other, I may have two opinions, but I haven't made a change. So therefore, I cannot set up a table where I'm eating meat, you're eating dairy, and there's no other separation between us, because even though I'm going to remember one and you'll remember the other, but we're so used to eating off one table, I may come to slip. In the case of the husband and wife, there is a change. What's the change? They're both clothed. Okay, and actually Rashi makes it very clear that it looks like people very clearly slept together without clothing. That's what a husband and wife did. So the fact that they are each wearing clothing, some kind of nightgown or some kind of pajamas, is actually a shinoi from what it normally was. So the Gemara says, Hasam deos ika, shinu leka. There, with the eating on the table, I can't have two people who know each other, because there are two opinions, deos, but there's no shinu, it's the regular table. The only time we can have it is if I have two separate tablecloths. Right? But two people on the same tablecloth or the same table cannot eat, one eat meat and one eat chicken, one eat cheese. But here there are two people, husband and wife, and there's a shinui, they're both dressed when they go to bed. So that'll wake that, if they decide to kind of slip the boundaries, the fact that they're both clothed will become another impediment to wake them up and bring them back to what they should and shouldn't be doing. Okay? So that is really the answer up until the separation, what it is between the husband and wife. So we really haven't answered the question. Looks at this point like it's okay. Ikud Yamri. Now we have a second version of this Gemara. Is everybody with me? Yeah. Ikud Yamri. So this is the same thing, only it's a little inverted. Toshma. Rav Shimon Gamaliel Omer Shnei Achsaim Ochnem Al Shulchan Echad. Shal Shulchan Echad. Zeh Basar v'zeh Gvina. So we start the other way around. We start from the two people coming to the end. Two travelers, two guests. One is eating on one table. One is eating meat. One is eating cheese. V'yitmar Allah, we learned on it. Amrav Chanin Bar Ami, Amrav Shmuel. Lo Shano El Shein Makirin Zed Zeh. The only time they can eat together is when they don't recognize each other. They don't know each other. Aval Makirin Zed Zeh, Asr. But if they recognize each other, it's Asr. V'hani Mili Makirin Zeh Edzen Ninhu. So when in the case of the husband and wife, they recognize each other. They know who each other. They have their makirins. The Gemara says, wait, the difference is, it's almost the same. Gemara, Hasam deas ika shinu leka, Hacham deas ika v'ika shinoi. Okay, so there, it's the same conclusion at this point. So there, with eating at the table, there is deos, but there's no shinoi. With the husband and wife, there are two deos, there are two opinions, and there is a shinoi, the fact that they're clothed. Okay, so far so good. Okay, but the Gemara doesn't end here. If you lost me for a moment, we're on the first long line. Toshma. But now we come back to the Zav and the Zava. Remember the Zav and the Zava? Yeah. So now this backs it into this discussion about into discussion about the husband and wife and about people eating at the same table. Lo yochal hazav mavzava mibnei hergel aveira. Okay, so you see the Zav can't eat with the Zava because we're concerned they may become intimate. So why not? So the Gemara answers the question. Hachanami, the same thing. Deos ika shinu leka. The Zav and the Zava were eating on the same table. So there are two people. They may come to remind each other, but there's no change in the routine. They're both eating on the same table the way they would normally be. So therefore, it would be the same concern, and therefore it's prohibited. And therefore, two people in the bed should also be maybe prohibited. Toshma. El Heharim, this is on Yecheskel Perikid Ches. This is talking about a righteous person, a tzaddik. So Yecheskel is trying to sketch out what a real tzaddik does. El Heharim lo achal. He didn't turn. Doesn't mean he doesn't eat. He means he didn't rely upon the mountains. He didn't rely upon schut avos, his righteous ancestors. Ve'inav lo nosa el glulei beis Yisrael, and he didn't turn to worship the idols of the house of Israel. V'es eishes re'ehu lo timei, and he didn't purify or sleep with the wife of his neighbor. V'el isha nida lo yikrav, and he didn't come close to his own wife who is a nida. So the Gemara says this is the pasuk that Yecheskel says. It's talking about an amorphous, unnamed tzaddik. We did all the right things. What did he do right? He relied upon his own tzidkus. He didn't worship idols. He didn't come to sleep with Eishes Re'ehu. He didn't come close to a nida. So makish Eisha nida liishto Re'ehu. To compare the two, the nida and the Eishes Re'ehu. Ma Eishes Re'ehu hu bevigda v'hi bevigda aser. The same way that you cannot become close and intimate, even with clothing, to the wife of your friend. Afishto nida hu bevigda v'hi bevigda aser. The same thing, even your own wife, when she's a nida, you cannot, even if you're separated by separate clothing, you cannot sleep together in the same bed. Shema mina, that becomes the conclusion of the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara seems to conclude that husband and wife, even if they're wearing separate pajamas, cannot be sharing the same bed when she is a nida. That's one opinion. Upligi the Rav Padas, the Rav Padas, lo asr tar lekurva shagulei aras bilvad. Rav Padas says no. The only prohibition between a husband and wife is actually gilei aras, actual sexual coitus. Ubilvad shenemar ish el kol she'er b'saro lo sikravu legalos erva. That a person cannot come close to she'er b'saro may mean his wife as well. Lo sikravu legalos erva, to uncover her nakedness. That refers to actual sexual coitus. So in other words, it looks like, with the exception of Rav Padas, that the halacha would come down to saying that a husband and wife cannot share the same bed even if they're fully clothed. That becomes the conclusion of the Gemara, and the Gemara now ends up with two stories. Okay, very unusual stories. The second one is actually very disturbing. That'll take us down to the Mishnah. The first question story is disturbing in a different way. It's about Ula. Ula. Remember, there's a Gemara that says it as it is. Ki havi asmi be'rav. This is 6 lines on the bottom. When Ula would come home from the academy, Beis Rav, the yeshiva, he would kiss his sisters. Okay, Abei Chadaihu. Abei Chadaihu means chedva, which is love. So it actually means their breasts. Okay, the palms of love. Okay, which, if you will, the breasts are, I guess, inverted palms. That's what the Rashi and the other Rishonim say. The Amri Lane, some say Abei Yodayim. So no, it wasn't that gross. Okay, it wasn't that, so to speak, over the edge. He kissed them on their palms of their hands. Okay, these are big women. He's a big man. He's the great Ula. Okay, and either way you read the story, this looks like a public sharing of affection, which in our modern society we would have no problem. The first one would be more problematic, right? To go and kiss his sisters on their breasts, and we're talking about big sisters and big Ula. This is great Ula. So you see, this is thrown in here as a coda to the concept of people who are prohibited one to the other. They can still actually have a certain amount of closeness. Upligi didei adidei. And then the Gemara says, and this is a really strange story, and Ula himself argues on himself. The Amra Ula, because Ula said, afilu shum kurva asar, any type of closeness between himself and a close relative is still prohibited. Any type of sharing of affection or touching, as it says, mishum, and I'll just read this to you and explain it. Lech lech amri nazira schar schar lekarma lo. Lech lech amri nazira kama schar schar lekarma lo tigrav. This is what we say to the nazir. We say to the nazir who cannot drink wine, don't go go around the vineyard. Schar schar, go around it. Lekarma lo tigrav. Don't go into the karam. Don't go into the vineyard. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with a nazir going to the vineyard. What will happen if he goes into the vineyard? He'll drink the wine or drink the grapes. He'll eat the grapes. Okay, so in other words, the same way here. So you have two statements of Ula, or you have an event of Ula, which seems to say that he didn't feel that was a problem, and yet Ula says, no, it looks like you shouldn't be doing this. So it's and the Gemara doesn't really reconcile that. So it makes it somewhat problematic. So Tosfos says that, well, Ula was such a great tzaddik that he would never come to sin, and this and that, and that's why he kind of was more heter for himself with his sisters. But for other people, he was saying this. Okay, I'm just telling you the way the Gemara says. Okay, so far so good.
Yeah.
Okay, now we come to the real problematic story. Okay, and this is going to take us to a Mishnah. And I don't know if it's sorry I leave you with the story, but it's surely something to think about. Okay, it's one of these stories that has theological implications. Tani Dve Eliyahu. There's a sefer available called there's a sefer called Tani Dve Eliyahu. Anybody ever read it? Or Eliyahu Rabbi Eliyahu Zuta.
Is this Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer?
That's not That's Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, and there's Sefer Eliyahu Rabbi and Eliyahu Zuta, or Tani Dve Eliyahu. They're both called together. It's really a series of stories that Eliyahu visits people and events that happen. People meet Eliyahu and so forth. And there are other stories of other Rabbanim that are there. It's actually it's an easy read book kind of thing. I won't say it's a really easy read. There is an English translation. There's a Hebrew translation with this. There's an Nakud translation, but it's not the kind of deep kinds of Talmud stories. It's more stories about Eliyahu. You know, the Eliyahu figures in a number of Sephardi folktales, right? Like we have our Hasidic Rebbe's, so that's where Eliyahu fits in. So this is a story. It's called Tana Dve Eliyahu. Either came from this source, and Rashi the Masaras Shas says it's found over Rabbi Nassan. It's a story that was told over in the school of Eliyahu about Eliyahu Navi. So apparently, this is one of these Eliyahu stories. Ma'aseh b'Talmud Echad. Who is telling the story? Obviously, the first person is Eliyahu telling the story. There was a story about a scholar, Talmud. Okay, we don't know his name, but he was a good scholar, good Talmud. Sheshana Harbe, he read a lot, means he learned Torah. Kara Harbe read Tanakh. Shana Harbe means he actually learned a lot of Mishnayos. So it really should be the other way around. Kara Harbe and Shana Harbe. Kara means to read Tanakh. Shana means to learn, which means learns Mishnah and Gemara. V'shemesh Talmidei Chachamim Harbe, and he served a lot of Talmidei Chachamim. Look, the real righteous guy, did all the right things. Umeis b'chatzi yamav, and he died when he was young. Okay, sad story. Young person, did all the right things, big tzaddik, did service to Talmidei Chachamim, learned and studied. What went wrong? V'haisa ishtam natelas tfilav, and his wife, the widow, took his tefillin. Okay, umachzartam beveit batei knesses batei mashas, and she would circulate. You could see the grief and the loss that this woman had. She's married to a Talmud Chacham. He does the right things and suddenly dies young. What happened? So she takes his tefillin and she goes around to all the different shuls. V'amar lahem, and she said to all the scholars, "Kasiv b'Torah." It says in the Torah, Torah, it says in the Torah, right? This is your life and length of your days. You study. Bali sheshana harbe v'kara harbe. My husband, he studied a lot of Mishnah and Gemara. Kara harbe, learned a lot of Tanakh. V'shemesh Talmidei Chachamim harbe, and he serviced a lot of Talmidei Chachamim harbe. Mipnei ma meis b'chatzi yamav. Why did he die when he was young? Right? This is the kind of grief-full, tear-jerking kinds of questions, right? And of course, what kind of answer is there? So Gemara says, "V'lo haya adam machzir davar." No one had an answer for her. Right? These are the kinds of questions that we all ask when we see young people die. We see people die. We don't know what goes on in terms of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's din v'cheshbon. We don't understand these kinds of things, and we can ask them, but we never get an answer.
Why did she take his tefillin?
So why did she take his tefillin? Because he obviously wore the tefillin the whole time. He was in the Beis Medrash the whole time. He's not leaving him. So the way to identify what remains of him, what's she going to take? His gold watch. He probably didn't have a gold watch. So look, they may have worn talis outside the Beis Medrash too. Nothing wrong with wearing a talis. Look. In fact, you walk around Shabbos, you see all the Lubavitchers wearing talis.
No, so why didn't she take this talis as opposed to the tefillin?
Because I think the tefillin was something you had to wear when you were holy. Right, you couldn't wear tefillin when you were going out and doing things. This was what people identified. Here's the guy who wore tefillin. We saw him in the Beis Medrash all day with these tefillin. See, these are the tefillin. This is my husband. You saw him with this every day. Right, the fact that you see a guy with talis is not outstanding. You can wear talis. They wore talisim where they're probably their robes anyway. I don't know they didn't have a Shabbos talis and a weekday talis and a vachadik talis. Okay, but tefillin had a tremendous amount of kedusha, and they wore them much longer than we did. We put them on for davening, we take them off because of the kedusha of tefillin. We don't think we can actually watch them. We can't. Right? We can't even watch tefillin when we have them on. Right? How many times you kind of pull out your phone in the middle of davening? We all do it, right? Don't tell anybody. Okay. We pretend we try not to. Our minds our minds slip and we think other thoughts. And they're not about davening and not about God. So this guy was a real, true, honest guy. He really played the game. He did the game properly. So that's why it looks like she took the tefillin. This may have been actually he may have not been surely very rich, and she's left with nothing. Right? She looks like she's left with nothing as a scholar. He's not a businessman. So she's left with nothing, and she has the old question, Tzaddik v'Ralo. Okay, and if the story ended there, we'd probably be happier. So Pamachat netarachti etzla. One time I visited her. I is the assuming this is Eliyahu, so to speak.
Eliyahu Navi.
Eliyahu Navi, right? So we're assuming that this is what the story is telling. These are the kinds of stories that come up in Talmud of Eliyahu. And she told me, she explained to me the whole story. And what is Eliyahu say? Eliyahu is also a direct shooter. And I said to her, Biti, as you'll see, you'll read the story and you'll kind of get very nervous. When you were in Nida, right, how did he behave with you? So Amrali, so she said to me, Chas v'shalom afila betzba ketana lo noga bi. He didn't even touch my little finger. In other words, he remained completely separate. We didn't share, we didn't touch, right? We didn't pass things one to the other. There were complete separation when I was in Ida. Then he stops. Then he says another question. Bimei levonayach mahu metzlech. These are what they call the white days. In other words, after, and I'll explain to you, after what we do today is actually the Nida. Women keep today a combination of Nida and Zava. Okay, Nida is the flow that happens to a woman, which is really the menstrual cycle. Zava is when the flow happens when it's not the right time of the menstrual cycle. We don't know what this is, right? We consider it, and Benosis will accept this to consider this exactly the same form as like Nida. Okay, so or vice versa, they consider Nida to be like a Zava. So they don't know. In other words, so what's the difference? A Nida, when the flow starts, counts 7 days, then she goes to the mikvah. The Zaba has to wait for the flow to stop before she counts 7 days. So there's a difference between when, let's say, a woman could become a Nida, she could be able to go to mikvah 7 days afterwards, if it was just Nida. But if today we count Nida and Zaba the same way, so let's say a woman has a menstrual cycle and she stains and bleeds for, let's say, 5 days. Let's say 5 days. Then she has to wait another 7 days. Right? So she doesn't go to mikvah until date 11, 12, 13, 14, whatever it is. That's how we do things. And we only go to the mikvah, or the women only go to the mikvah after the flow is stopped and after 7 clean days have been counted. Okay? So he's now asking about the Mei Levonayich, the white days. And I'll have to explain to you when I finish this what apparently the Tosa says how they count the things a little differently. When you were no longer in Nida and you were still counting the white days, how did he behave with you? So she says, Ochalimi, he ate with me, Shasaimi, he drank with me, means on that little table. V'yoshan imi b'kirav basar. And he slept together with me b'kirav basar, v'lo also daito al davar acher. And he didn't think about anything else. Okay, in other words, forget clothing. No clothing. They slept completely naked. But of course, his mind was still in the base measure. He was such a holy man, he didn't even think about any type of anything else. But that's what happened b'mei levonayich, on the days after I was no longer seeing the Nida flow. So this is what she tells Eliyahu. This is a very intimate story, right? It's like only an Eliyahu story can happen this way. So v'amarti lo, and I said to her, this is the unsettling part of the story. Baruch hamokum sharago. Blessed is God who killed him. Wow. Okay. Shalom. I'm telling you, it's a very unsettling story. Shalom nasa panim la Torah. Now this is a difficult line. Lo nasa panim la Torah means God did not show favoritism for Torah. In other words, God didn't say, well, because this man sat in the base medrash all day, so I'm going to bend the rules. Sharei Tomra Torah, because the Torah says in Vayikra Yirala Vel Isha b'nidas tumaso lo sikrav, that you cannot come close to a nida, and the day she's told me you cannot close, and he did. So the fact you want to know the reason what happened, why was there this din v'cheshbon, how did Kadosh Baruch Hu have the reason, what was the reason why he died so young, this was the punishment, this is what he did wrong. Okay, a very difficult story. Very difficult story. Now, let's finish up the Gemara and then I'll give you the coda to the story. So it sounds like, first of all, it sounds like this guy was not such a big tzaddik. So Kiyasa Rav Dimi Amar, when Rav Dimi came from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, he said, from Eretz Yisrael back to Bavel, he said, I heard the story, and I learned the story, and mito chada havoi, that it was one very big bed. In other words, Rashi says it was a very wide bed. So yes, they were in the same bed, but it was a king-size bed, and he was on one end, and she was on the other end. So it doesn't mean that they were really sleeping together. Okay, it's really true they didn't have clothing on, right? They didn't have pajamas on, but he was not even close to her. That's the story. In other words, you shouldn't think that this guy was embracing his wife the whole night and going to learn the next day in the Beis Medrash. And then B'ma'arav Amrei, and then we say in Eretz Yisrael they said, Rav Dimi is also bringing back Eretz Yisrael here. In one version there was one mitzvah. B'ma'arav Amrei in Israel they said, Amrav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Sinor Mafsik Beino Levena. Sinor is like probably like knickers that they translate it. So in other words, it wasn't really proper garments, but there really was something that separated between the two. There's Old French. Jonathan, are you a good Old French person? Pour saint. No clue? No clue. Okay, I don't know. So shehi chogeres bo. Magim, Rashi says, it was really a type of some kind of knickers or I don't know, Lululemon type of thing or something like that. I don't know exactly what it was, but no, doesn't mean that they were completely naked, right? She had on something that separated between the two of them, but it wasn't completely that she was gowned up, so to speak. So that's the story. Now, Tosfos and the other Rishonim try to understand what this means. How could this guy have relations, or not? How could this guy become close to his wife if he's such a big Talmud Chacham? So they suggest that they had a different, or he may have had a different approach, and maybe others had a different approach as well. What do? I told you, we do a combination of Nida and Zaba. So really, if it was just Nida, the woman would count when she sees Dam Nida, and then count 7 days. And if by the 7th day she's clean, right, she's 1 day of clean, it's fine. We don't do that. We say that, and if she sees it at a different time at Zaba, we say that even when she sees Nida, we don't know the time, so we're going to consider like a Zaba, she has to have stopped the flow, has to stop, and then start count days. So it appears that they had 2 times when they went to the mikveh in those days. Okay, that's what Tosfos and others suggest. That when the woman sees blood and goes to the mikveh right at 7 days immediately, which is really what the law is minatar, because that's clearly Nida. The fact that we consider it like Zaba is really a chumrah that Benos Yisrael have taken upon themselves. So, and then they would go again when the count of Zaba would finish. So it would be like a double mikveh. It would be mikveh the 7th night, right? Which means that Minan Torah, she is tahar, but then they would still count from the end of when the flow was, which could be now going to the mikveh again 4 or 5 days later, or 6 days later, whatever it is. So it means it's not cleaning this guy's slate completely. It's saying that he wasn't breaking any doraisa. First, we didn't sleep with his wife, and second of all, even what he did was she was no longer considered nida min Torah. She had gone to the mikvah. That's how they try to, I don't want to say whitewash it, but reduce the severity of what it is. The story itself is an extremely difficult story because it sounds like a very harsh God, right? It sounds like, okay, what happens to us? Who are we? But it does mean that probably the musar is that it's sometimes very difficult for us to understand what mitzvos and what averos HaKadosh Baruch Hu has in v'cheshbon. If we were to write the story, we would say this guy should probably get the award for sitting in the Beis Medrash all day, right? In God's cheshbon, he has different things there as well. So that's why I said it's an unnerving type of piece of Gemara, but it does end off this whole piece about Nida and Zavo and Nida and so forth and so forth and so on, and brings us up to the next Mishnah.
Teachers also you don't know what is happening. Correct. Really in the chamber, in the bed chambers. You don't know what's going on.
Correct. What means what happens outside is not always indicative of what's happening inside. So that's one value, and the second value is you don't know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what's important, what's less important, right? Yeah. And all these things are very private. True. So that takes us there. The next Mishnah, by the way, just is going to be a completely different topic, and it's going to go back into Shabbos. And then I told you there's about 3 or 4 dapim which are going to get back into Tum and Tahara. Oh yeah. We'll try to do them as quickly as we can. Okay. All right. We'll do them as quickly as we can. I'm not going to get too far into depth. Okay. But then we're back into Shabbos after that. Okay.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
You said Sanya was